Hi, everybody. Thank you, Kevin. That was amazing. And thank you, Ben, for handing over to me. I'm delighted to be back at Host City again this year. Hopefully, you are all tuning in because you enjoyed my session this morning with Michael Gunning. Now I have another array of fantastic panelists to chat to about the subject broadcasting, who owns the rights. So as you know, the topic of this year's Host City is refresh, regenerate, reconnect, which is what we're going to be focusing on. But first of all, please allow me to introduce my panelists. I have Jeff Foulser, Chairman of Sunset+Vine, Jamie Hindhaugh, Chief Operating Officer at BT Sport, Peter Hutton, Director of Sports Partnerships at Meta, and Pedro Presa, Chief Direct-to-Consumer Officer at 11 Group. I just about managed to get my teeth back in for that one, Pedro. And as Ben said, my name is Katie. I'm a board director at the European Sponsorship Association and the founder of a talent agency, Good Vibes Only. More about that in a minute and the role of talent in broadcast. But the first thing I want to ask, okay, the panel is broadcasting, who owns the rights? So I would love to hear from all of you who you think it should be and what you think the future holds in terms of how that evolves. So on my screen, I've got Peter, Jeff, Jamie, and then Pedro. So if you don't mind, with no favoritism, maybe we could go in that order.
Not great news, but I'll go first, yeah. I think it's an interesting question in terms of who it should be. I think particularly as you look at where we're going with the creation and consumption of content, I'd actually put a hand up and say audience. And not audience in the conventional sense, in that, I think we're moving away from sort of passive audiences receiving content, but audience in the sense of how do you encourage people to create more around your events? How do you make them feel like they're actually very much part of the process? So opening up that IP, allowing people to create with the content, I think is the direction of the future. And to give them that sense of presence, of being part of what's going on. So I think, that for me is the direction of the future. When we talk at Meta about this convergence of VR and AR content, then we're really thinking about presence and audience. And obviously the IP goes back to the original event holder. So the rights holder has to then have that vision of a future that says, okay, I need my IP to bring in conventional broadcasting rights, but it's also my key tool to make my audience engaged, and that the most engaging content is going to come from fans using it, reworking it. It's going to come from athletes using it and reworking it, and therefore really sort of having a legacy in terms of where my IP goes as a rights holder.
Jeff, you agree?
No speak. I do agree with that, but I also think that it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that there are lots of people around the world, and certainly in the UK, who cannot afford to pay a subscription channel. Maybe there are people that can't afford to buy, have an Amazon Prime account, although a lot of people have. So I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that certainly for the bigger events, we want to make the sports available to as wide a possible audience, and that's how sports will help to grow and expand. We've seen over the last 20 or the last 15 years or so in the UK with cricket, which not a lot of people in the Commonwealth countries will know a lot about cricket, but that's a sport that was sold out to a pay TV channel, and it lost a lot of impact, lost a lot of youngsters coming through to play the game, and they've been trying to catch up. The authorities have been trying to catch up ever since. So I think it's important that we recognise that sport should be, notwithstanding the commercial realities, but try and make it as available to as many people as we can.
What do you think about that, Jamie? The role of pay TV sport.
I must cut Jeff's commission. I'm leaning more towards Peter actually. I agree completely with what he said. And I think there are two things that are really important, though, is we also need to be able to ensure we realise the value back to the rights holders to invest in sport. That's really, really important. And secondly, I look at the role of what Beat Sport does and what all of us do, actually. And we shouldn't forget the halo effect and aggregation opportunities, because there are certain sports that will stand alone, will always be popular, will always drive revenue, will always have people engaging with them. But there are a huge range of sports that actually the best opportunity for them is awareness driven off the back of some of these marquee sports. So I think it's a really complicated one, actually. And sports rights inflation is a difficult one. But at the same time, I'm enjoying seeing, and we're doing a lot, we have something called Match Day Experience, which is about people playing with the content, getting involved in the content and feeling like they're part of the content. And that for me is definitely the future, as long as we balance the aggregation and the investment going back into the sport.
And Pedro, Chief Director Consumer Officer, but what's the best way to get to those consumers?
Thank you so much, Katie, and good afternoon, everyone. I think it's a bit of what everyone said, and Peter and Jamie, namely, I think the fans will have a lot of importance on how we will consume content in the future. But I think media companies, as Jamie said, still have a really important role supporting rights holders in making sure that their content is produced, delivered in really high quality. And I really think, now I'm speaking personally, that live is still a very important format when it comes to sports content in general. So I really think that the role of media companies in the future is still very important, but it needs to be a different role, not only broadcasting this content linearly, but how can media companies create a universe digitally and linearly, because there's still a lot of space for linear in certain markets, on how they will be able to basically interact content that is premium and live with fans content, player user generated contents, but as well on how you can go beyond your own platform and try to position content in, such as an example, Facebook that we have represented here, and how you can create that universe being platform agnostic, but as well still being able to serve the rights holder, being able to finance the rights holder so they can continue investing in the development of the sport. So I think it will be a mix of everything, and the secrets of the one that will win was going to be on how the best company will do better in terms of comprising all these contents and trying to engage with the consumer, offering the best content during the best part of the most part of the day, basically.
So it's interesting what you all say, and I agree overall with the perspective, but I would like to hone in on the subject of control. Because it's all very well the theory of what will engage the audience most, but most organizations like to have some control over that which they're communicating with the outside world. You know, I've been a chief communications officer. The thought of not having control over that narrative makes my heart go, even though it's not my job anymore. You know, there's two things here, right? There's the live environment, because we're operating now in sports worlds where you've got co-streamers on Twitch who are actually offering live alternative commentary sometimes. And then there's also the environment afterwards, where both, you know, content perhaps provided by rights holders or alternative content can be created by the fans as well as the broadcasters. How do your organizations feel about relinquishing some of that control, and what's the cost benefit? Maybe I'll start with you again, Peter. I know it's a bit repetitive, but I would like to hear from the perspective of Meta, since you've taken a whole load of the control out of our hands.
I think we've put control back into your hands, but I think you know, our perspective is very much, we're not a rights holder, right? We're a platform. We're about having tools that allow people to create. So, you know, from our point of view as a company, this is the direction we want people to go in. You know, we want IP holders to free up that control, be brave enough to have authentic content created in and around and before their events. And I take your point, Katie, you know, that can be slightly frightening to a rights holder. But I think it's also up to us and the other social media platforms to have the right tools in place so that the monetization flows back to the original rights holder, and that also we have a secure system in terms of people not being abused and people not receiving negative experiences as part of the journey. But for me, the idea is that we create better and better tools that allows people to access audio, video, IP around those events, that then they can create their own authentic content and spread the legacy of those events. And I'm sure the monetization is clearly not as attractive as the guaranteed checks of a paid broadcaster, but the legacy in terms of fandom and in terms of supporters caring about the content, which of course is what we're really about, that's something that is the long-term goal.
Do you agree, Jamie?
Partly. I actually think we can and already do both. So BT Sport, we are a sports paid broadcaster, but we also really work hard on partnerships and relationships. So we work with Meta, we work with Twitter, we work with YouTube, and we put content in front of the paywall and make it available to people. I think the key challenge is there's two risks. I still think you need to keep something around live exclusive because that's where the value is. Actually, anything outside of live is where the stories are created and the interest is created and the conversation happens. And that's where all of these platforms working in partnership with us, we can deliver that ecosystem. There's one piece of caution I do have, though, and that is around control of our brand and the rights holders' brand, with people able to manipulate and send around video or audio that maybe doesn't represent our brand values. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, actually. And there are lots of controls in place now, but by working also in partnership with rights holders, you get them to start trusting you. And they are very supportive, but I like the ecosystem of working with people like Peter and those organizations as well, because I think we all benefit. So we look at the strength of their platforms and it complements our main platform.
Can I dive in there? I mean, we're not a rights holder or a broadcaster. We work for both. But I think one of the big issues, and Jamie and Peter will have probably more to say on this, is piracy, and we've seen it over the last few years, particularly in the Middle East. But it's going on in our own back doors. I've got a friend who's a Brentford supporter. And when Brentford are not on BT Sport or Amazon Prime or Sky, he can because he's young, he can get onto a website very, very easily and watch it for nothing. And that has an impact on the value of the rights that the big broadcasters, I don't know what BT's, it's probably about £1.5 million a game they're paying for rights, somewhere around there.
I wish.
And more than that, whatever it is, it's a lot of money, and it must have a devaluing effect on the rights that you have, Jamie, don't you think?
Yeah, it does. And I always think the easy answer is everyone to go, it's OTT, it's digital streams are much less secure, but it's actually not that. Because a lot of the stuff that's pirated is people picking it up from overseas and other territories, and I think there does need to be tighter control on you can buy them very easily, where you can have access to all the sports feeds all around the world, and it does devalue, and we notice it things like pay-per-view as well. It becomes a real challenge, but that's got to be tackled as around the capabilities to be able to access those. I don't believe it's people just logging into an IP stream and getting hold of it. Actually, I think it's more complicated than that, but it's probably the biggest risk to rights holders, actually, because it does diminish value.
Yeah. For us at 11, we still believe that, I speak personally and for 11, most of the ownership still, and the biggest ownership still lies on the big rights holders. We just saw the recent deal done by the Premier League in the US And following a bit what Jamie said, live is still what drives then value around all the other original formats that we serve and see in other platforms. But I do believe that more and more, as Peter explained, there's a lot of space, and especially via technology, to enable content creators to leverage platforms out there, including ourselves. We've acquired MyCujo recently. We've launched 11sports.com, which enables not only random people to create content around the content we have, but as well clubs, leagues, and federations that otherwise would not have space within premium distribution channels to just leverage the technology we have to put their content out there. Obviously, the discussion always lies around exactly around what Jamie said, the message that you want to put across associated with your brands. So we really control a little bit still the content, even though it's user generated coming into our platform. That's a challenge, right? There's a lot of manual control. We see a lot of feature, and we've been growing content wise in terms of long tail and organic content massively. It's very important as well because the churn around that content is very low. So that allows us to keep stronger relationship with these communities, which then feeds to the premium communities. But we believe as well in serving this content and working with partners like Meta, because we have recently as well acquired Whistle. And in order to give a full cycle to content, we believe that restricting that content to lay only in live and in the formats we serve within our platforms limits as well the democratization of this content for all audiences out there. And Jeff mentioned as well on how costly sometimes could we try and then on around live and work with partners and then serve this content in multiple formats across social media, where we have millions of followers in different channels, but as well creating formats where we serve around documentary formats in Netflix, Amazon, you name it. So that's how we believe we serve it now.
Yeah, Jeff, what you brought up with the piracy, I think is hugely relevant, right? Because it's such a increasing part of the sort of sports economics, and people talked about that NBC huge deal here in the US. As a US soccer consumer, in that I sort of spit slightly over the word, but regardless, it's really complicated to watch all the football that I want to watch, right? Because it's split between about 6 different platforms, all of which involve pay OTT subscriptions. And that naturally drives me and people like me to go and find an illegal stream because, you don't really want to sign up for 6. It's just getting embarrassing at that point. And sad football fan that I am, even I would sort of balk at signing up for 6 different subscription products. So I think the key thing is, as a broadcaster or as an aggregator of rights, it's creating that sense of community and giving an experience that a pirate can't give. I remember sort of going back in my history, we were in India and we had like a horrific problem with Indian cricket streams being sort of pirated and live. And it was playing whack-a-mole. We were shutting down this feed and then 10 more would spring up the next minute. And we simply sort of said, okay, let's put our live feed out free to air on the web and just have a higher quality stream to try and cut down the need for all this stuff. And then we'll monetize it separately. We had a separate advertising feed. We did separate content around it, simply because we sort of had to accept, look, this is where the audience is going. So how can we create something better that they will respond to? And in the context of the Premier League, that's really tough because of the rights that are not available in the UK live. But I think as a philosophy, the idea of creating groups and community around your content as a reason to stay with the official route and not just try and find a cheap feed is definitely a big part of the answer.
Yeah, I think the piracy thing disappeared in the UK during COVID when sport came back, but without crowds. So, BT and Sky were covering every single match. There's no need for piracy, as you say, Peter. It's there and available.
There's a key bit you missed on that, Jeff, is we stopped charging people.
Yeah, that's true
during
as well. Yeah,
COVID,
yeah,
and that's the bit, and that's I agree with where Peter's going. It's and actually OTT and the proliferation of rights going elsewhere could perpetuate that problem, actually. And I do worry there'll be a lot of sports that may drop off the end because, like Peter, you get so many, don't you? I mean, I've got Prime, bloody Disney Plus, and everything else, and I get embarrassed by it because I don't watch any of them. But there comes a point where the next one comes along, and you're like, can't quite do that. So that's where I see the role of someone like BT Sport, which I would say because I'm there. their opportunity. And I agree with Peter's point. We focus a lot on quality as well, because you know, sport is a social viewing experience. People want to come together to watch it. They want to be able to see what they're looking at, and they want to have the commentary in the language that they understand. And I think we win a lot of people that way. So the 4K, the HDR, Dolby Atmos, creating that, it's like you're at the event with that guaranteed quality, I think is a positive offensive against pirating, other than trying to shut people down.
So talk to me about how to harness attention in a positive way. Out there right now, there's a huge amount of content across lots of channels on all topics, and I don't think sport's going anywhere anytime soon. But you could argue that all of this attention and all of the content being made is creating a lot of noise that it's actually quite hard then to cut through as a business, and the business of sport becomes reduced in its power. Or you could argue that actually all of this attention and the eyeballs on everybody, all publicity is good publicity. People are consuming sport where they didn't used to be able to, and it can only increase the value of rights of sports that otherwise people may never have heard of because they wouldn't have ended up on broadcast television. Which way do you reckon it's going? I'm going to start with you, Pedro.
If I understood the question well, I really think and I agree that the challenge that sports broadcasters and rights holders currently have is the fact that we're not competing anymore with only each other. We're competing with these massive content creators like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and they're taking eyeballs and consumers. At the same time, this is happening. I still believe, and we have a lot of data that says that sports still remain being one of the main drivers in terms of subscribers into operators and platforms, subscriber platforms. So, as I said, I think what we believe is that focusing only on live is not a solution. Focusing only on original content is not a solution. Focusing only on our own platforms is not a solution. What we're really seeing, what we're really watching more and more, and I really believe that that's the future, is that you're going to see a lot of, in order to fight piracy, you need to start creating more and more engaging content. You need to create an engaging environment within your platform, not only on TV, but as well digitally, to engage with the consumer in different ways. And I really believe that, for instance, watch and bets could be a great game changer in the future within platforms like ours and others that we're seeing out there, because you're engaging with the consumer in a responsible way, but as well gamifying the whole experience. So I think gamification is very important. But then ultimately, I really believe in what Peter said, like the fact that we're having so from sometimes paying for content and supporting the development of a single industry, so of a specific industry. So the fact that companies that are serving different types of contents will need to come together and start serving collective subscription models, and we're seeing that happen not only in Europe and in the US, where Disney Plus is striking partnerships with the sports distributors as well. So we're going to see more and more that happening, and I think that's the future, where companies are coming together and complementing each other in terms of offerings, so they can serve the subscriber better at an affordable price.
How does that map onto the relationships that you have, for example, Jamie, with an organisation like Facebook or Meta, or across all of Facebook's channels, Instagram, WhatsApp, you name it?
Well, they've got great platforms that have different audiences and different engagement tools. And so, to be blunt, we exploit their capabilities, but in a really positive way, because you're reaching different audience segments. And going back to your original question, I think the one thing that we all need to remember is live sport is about the only appointment to view events that happen now. And because it's appointment to view, because I mean, we're all sports fans, you know, you join it 10 minutes late, it's rubbish. You want to watch the event and you want to watch it live. The last thing you want is your phone pinging and someone telling you what the result is or what's happening in the event. So, but what that does do is it goes right back to base, doesn't it? It's very tribal, that mentality of people coming together at a certain time. And the challenge for us, and we are doing this and trying to do more of it, is making them, when they come together, feel part of that experience. So that personalization about polling, about do you agree with that decision? You know, with 5G around the corner, for me, the ultimate ambition is the only members of our audience we never speak to live are the people sat in the bloody stadium. Now, if we can get their thinking, their experiences editorially out into our content, all of a sudden what you're doing is you're taking everyone else outside the stadium into the stadium. And that's where the conversations start. And I agree with Pedro. We do a lot of film entries, top end, but also understanding what people want as well. You know, they want those water cooler moments, don't they? They want that bit of knowledge that they think no one else has got. They want to inform the conversation. They want to go behind the scenes. They want to see things you don't normally see. And, you know, we do stuff like AR tours of stadia, so you can go in the dressing rooms, etc. You can't actually do it, be physically at the stadiums. And that's sort of, you know, we do a lot of, so I'll call it Facebook Lives. It's Meta Live now, isn't it? But do a lot of those sorts of things where you're talking live to an audience. And there is a fantastic way of building up to a live event or discussing how that event panned out. And all of that gets into the ecosystem. And the more conversations you have, the more awareness there is. And that's really positive. It's like the old days when I used to go down the pub afterwards, and I'm an Arsenal fan. And even if they lost, if they won, I'd sit and moan for about 6 hours. Now you can still do that, but we're sort of facilitating and helping that across multiple platforms.
And Peter, so how does this work with the kind of cult of personality? We've seen over time that people used to religiously support a football club, and if their favourite player left, suddenly they thought that player was disloyal, whereas now they will shift in their droves with that player to support the new team, because they're looking out for the individual, and that kind of maps onto how influencers work as well in the talent space. With so much content, so much sports content, people are time poor. Are they genuinely going to watch it live through a traditional broadcaster and then see what their favourite content creators have to say about it? Or are they going to choose one or the other? And if they choose, who's going to win?
I'm going to take the route that you probably don't expect me to take on this, Katie, which I'll talk about how great the viewing figures are in the US for the NFL at the moment, where it's absolutely going through the roof. You know, the viewing figures are fantastic, largely because they're on hugely distributed channels, but because the cult of the personality drives your interest in those games, and you're still getting a real coming together moment around big live sports moments. Clearly, the individual is more and more important in the process. And if you look at the sort of, as I've travelled around the world with my children, you know, you see, first of all, it was Real Madrid jerseys, then Juventus jerseys, and then United jerseys as Ronaldo's gone on his journey. And you look at the power of his posts and his following, and it's a brilliant example about how an athlete can really have this huge audience that is bigger than the club that he works with. But you know, I'm still very positive about the live sports experience and what Jamie talked about in terms of bringing these communities of fans together, appointment to watch, in a way that the rest of the industry just doesn't have those moments. And that's the beauty of sport, and that's the power of sport to not just bring together people and get huge viewing figures, but also to have changing behavior because of sport. You know, because people want to be together and receive a sports moment in the best possible way, they will go to the technology that provides that to them in the easiest way. And as a result, that's why sport has driven media values over the years, and why I think it will still drive change going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate unscripted live drama, isn't it? Sports, you know, and I agree with everything you've all said. Really, it's you know, people love to come together for the big moments, and you know, you see that in, you know, across the board. Really, people much prefer to watch things and share it with their mates in the pub, or you know, at home with their families or something. It's a bit sad if you want to watch a major event sitting on your own with, you know, different platforms going off. I mean, I get that you need all of that to get the engagement, but ultimately people want to watch things and share that experience, hopefully in the same room.
And how about, Jeff? So digital distribution of sports has been on the rise, but it's also, relatively speaking, new, and new things tend to have a significant growth at the start. Do you think that's going to plateau off and there'll be a kind of complementary linear and digital broadcasting sitting alongside one another? Or do you think that digital will increasingly cannibalize the space of traditional broadcasters so that you may end up with a few power players but not such a rich market?
Well, Is that one to me?
Yes.
You get the easy questions, Jeff.
Yeah, I think this is more for Jamie and Peter, really. But I think my view is that one thing it is good for is it's good for sports federations and football clubs and rugby clubs and whatever, that there are more people that want to get involved. I mean, we've seen it in the UK over the last couple of years with Amazon Prime. At the moment they're still a disruptor, but we all know how deep their pockets are. If they decide they want to become more than a disruptor and part of the sort of, the regular broadcast framework in countries around the world, I think, they've got a pretty good model. I think they've got 200 million subscribers to Amazon Prime around the world. I think there's 15 million in the UK. I'm not sure what the total subscriptions for Sky and BT are now, but it's probably not as many as 15 million. So they've got a captive audience. It's up to them. I think they're here to stay, is my view. It just depends whether they want to continue to be a disruptor and use sport as a sort of marketing tool, or whether they want to become a broadcaster.
What do you think, Jamie? Would you argue that you have a strategic space that cannot be encroached upon?
This is my favourite conversation, and I love the fact you use the word traditional broadcaster, like we're a bunch of Luddites. We're only 9 years old, and I also think the industry obsesses with the pipe that gets the content to the customer. I don't think the customers do. This huge conversation about OTT or about linear, most people don't know the difference outside of our industry, and 25% of our content now is streamed. We're OTT, mobile, big screens, different platforms. And even OTT people are broadcasters. The definition of broadcasting is about bringing content together to distribute to your audience. And personally, I think it's all about people will go to what suits their lifestyles. I still believe people will watch on the biggest screen available. Sometimes that's on an iPad because they tend to be on a train. If they're in the house, they'll migrate to that. So what we have to do as broadcasters is use whatever mechanism possible to make that content available on the screens they want to watch it on. And I did the Olympics in 2012 when I was at the BBC. And one of the things I was most proud of, if we look back when we did that, is we were able to enable people to be able to get up in the morning, tune into the Olympics, drive into work still listening to what was happening in the Olympics, get into work, get online and watch what's happening in the Olympics. So it's about that always being available, no matter what platform you're on and where you are. And I think when OTT is stable, when you haven't got the spinning circle, which we all get every now and then, I think the audience will just migrate. And what we will do, our job is to make sure we're on the platforms they want to use. But this obsession the other way around about linear's dead and we need to switch off linear and we just need to go IP, I think is wrong. And we will end up there, but let's please let the audience behaviors drive us to the right place. And let's not try and change the behavior of our audience. There you go, my little rant.
It's great. Peter, I have been asked by many people to ask you this question, so I'm going to ask it to you, even though you probably answered it quite a few times a day for the last X many weeks. What does the rebrand to Meta mean for how sport is going to be distributed across your platforms?
Yeah, I've been asked it once or twice. The quick answer is, basically we're building on things we already have and we're building for the future. So while the company priority is clearly very much focused on the metaverse and on AR and VR sort of uses of content in general, I think it's all based on the communities that come together on Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and the other tools. So we sort of see it all as building blocks in that you're identifying yourself as a shared passion supporter of Derby County, and therefore, your content is personalized to you. And then when it comes to VR and AR distribution of that content, the idea is that we can create a better experience. It's Jamie's point exactly, which is, people want the best experience, the biggest screen. They want to feel like they're as close to the game as they can get. And that's the direction of travel. And for sport and what we're doing in Oculus at the moment, that's sort of very much on the edge of gaming. Gaming is clearly driving Oculus take up around the world. I mean, the numbers in the US are just incredible. And, to watch my kids sort of playing with their kids and with their friends, and they've got headsets on, but they're there talking to each other in avatar format. So they feel they're there together. And that gives you a sign of what sport could be in that environment. And there's huge technical hurdles to get there. And Jeff would probably be a better person to describe how you get there technically. But the idea that you can put a headset on and be with your friends, sharing an experience, talking to them, feeling like you're behind the goal, or actually now I'm going to go sit in the director's box and throw something at them. That experience of sort of being a genuine fan at the ground, but in your virtual environment, wherever you are, that's where we're trying to take not just sport, but entertainment in general. And the trials and the stuff that you get to touch and see here in Silicon Valley are remarkable. But the execution of that and the creation of business models behind that is clearly much more complicated. So, we're setting off on a journey. It's going to be based on the building blocks that we have in place. And I think it can take us to a very interesting way of experiencing content, whether that be sport or music or whatever type of content. But I think, it's not so far really from what Jamie and Pedro are talking about. It's building on our current experiences, looking to how we take that forward in the future. And 11, tying up with Whistle and Maikuju is a very similar concept, right? On the basis that you've got a tech platform, you've got short form video, you've got 11 as a traditional, and I appreciate the word traditional, it's slightly negative, but as a broadcaster, and those things come together to create a fan experience. It's not like you're choosing route A, route B, or route C. That they're all interlinked, and the more that we can interlink the future, then I think we get to a better place.
Can I just cut in? I'm sorry, Kate, on what Peter said, because I think he made a really important point that shouldn't miss. So we do 8K 360, and you can go and sit around the different stadiums and what have you. But most people use it on the Magic Window, not with headsets. And I think this is a really important point about what's missing at the moment with what we do and in general, which Peter's touched on. Because if you look back at broadcasting history, probably the biggest challenge was 3D. And in sport, the reason 3D didn't work is because sport is a social viewing experience. And as soon as you put a barrier between you and the people you're with, it becomes isolating, and therefore you don't get the same experience. And I think what Peter's touched on there with the avatars, with being able to have those conversations while being immersed, that's the missing link for me, because it is social. You do want to come together. And that's the bit people should pick up from what Peter was saying, because a lot of the technology is already there, but it's bringing people together in the same environment. They may have different experiences, but they can also have that shared experience. Would you agree, Peter? I think that's the key thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and also it's shared experiences with people you want to share it with, right? The worst thing about going to a stadium is having some idiot shouting in your ear behind doesn't know what he's talking about. You want to be there with people that care about things in the way that you do. And if you can create that shared experience with a community that you feel bonded to, then you're great. One of the things that I used to hate on Facebook when I first arrived, and thankfully it's all gone away, is they'd have like live games and you'd have streams of comments coming sort of down the screen. And it was loads of people going woo and yay and like coming out with all sorts of rubbish. And you're like, just switch it off. Like, it's really irritating. So it's really important that fandom is with people that you want to be fans with. If I'm going to a derby game, I want to stand in the away end because, we're all suffering together. And that shared experience is very important.
But don't you think that's more aimed at, sorry, Katie, don't you think that's more aimed at a much younger audience? I mean, okay, I'm much older, and my friends are not really interested in watching it with as an avatar or whatever. They're just not. That's aimed at a much younger audience, isn't it? Do you think that once people get past a certain age, they're not really as bothered about that? They just want to sit and watch a match or a game or whatever, and just soak it all up with their friends.
Well, I think people's experiences and desires are different, and it's not just about age. I think it's also about, demographics generally. But like my dad will sit and watch a game now, and he's on Twitter while he's watching a game, right? And he's like in his 80s, but he's accepted that actually this is a good place to be. He's in a Facebook group, which is Cricket Grounds of England, which is clearly not necessarily aimed at a younger audience, but it's still that sense of community around a sort of shared love. So I think you're right, Jeff, in that people will want to watch games in different ways. But in the end, I think people gravitate towards what is a social and positive experience. And as a result, I don't necessarily think it's age. There's a technology barrier that comes with age, but that I think people will gravitate to the best experience for them, right? And you're right in that it's not necessarily going to be right for everyone on day one. But I still think that's the direction of travel for us.
I agree, for want of offering an opinion, as somebody who I'm not as old as I look. I think it's about experience, absolutely, because I think this actually unites a point made by Peter and a point made by Jamie. So often, to my mind, kind of the words digital, virtual, etc., it's all very clever. It provides access, but it can also create distance from sport. I know that people like live sport, but personally, my favourite thing is to be in the stadium, or wherever you may be. And the thing about the AR and VR kind of revolution or evolution, depending on how you want to look at it, is that you can have that potential experience of feeling like you are at that live game as much as possible through a digital experience. And Jamie pointed out that there's nothing like that feeling of being able to be in that stadium, but it's done via technology. And so yes, of course, as Peter said, there's a kind of technological barrier and potentially just an understanding barrier, but I'm not sure it's age exclusive once that education piece is done. Pedro, one other thing for you. Esports. I want to talk about esports. So how are we going to describe it? A digital sport in a digital world? What do you think the future of esports and its influence on the broadcast of other sports is going to be? And for everyone out there, we have just under 6 minutes, so just a couple more questions.
No, just first to touch a bit on the topic of the AR VR, we're watching it very carefully as well. But as is the same as linear against digital, I don't think VR is here to substitute the presence in the stadium, or digital is here to substitute linear. I think they're both complementing each other and enabling companies to reach more audiences and more consumers, and engaging different audiences and demographics in different ways. So I think it was very, very good that you touched that topic with sports. We were following it very carefully. We're all very focused. Our strategy is still very, very centered in traditional sports or in sports, and in how we are approaching this in life in different formats. But we have been broadcasting via MyCujo, and as well now via the linear channel since a couple of years. We've been following with a lot of attention. We don't see esports as a main driver of our business model currently, but it's driving is as well, as I said, regarding digital and VR, AR, is enabling us to, it enables our brand to reach newer, younger audiences that we are not reaching via the traditional sports subscriber content and premium content. So we're really, really using it not as a means and a focus for us to grow in the future, but more as a means to little by little try to understand how we can engage with these new audiences. We're really aware that it's here to stay. We're really aware that it's here to grow, and we're looking at it very, very carefully. But it's more in an experimental phase towards us. I really believe that it's more of a digital product than a linear product, given the essence of the digital sports. That's why as well 11 has acquired MyCujo, because we really believe that that's one of the verticals we want to touch strongly in the future. And I believe that there are some companies that are competing alone in the space, namely Meta, YouTube, and Twitch. And I believe the media companies should start making a bit of competition around there as well. So definitely something to look into in the near future very strongly.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your time. I'm sure you can find all of the panel on LinkedIn if you want to reach out and tell them you thought they were wonderful or to ask them any questions. I would also like to say, just for the sake of it, before we dial off, I hope to also see that however we are broadcasting content, see the increasing rise of women's sport. And please do tune in to more Host City panels the rest of today, tomorrow, and next year. They will be going on forever. Thank you very much, and keep warm.